Welcome to the San Jose Hockey Now podcast. This is Sheng Peng, editor-in-chief of San Jose Hockey Now. You can also find my work at MEC Sharks and on Twitter, Sheng_Peng.
And I'm Keegan McNally. You can find my work at halfwallhockey.com, also at sanjosehockeynow.com, where I write articles on Sharks prospects. This week, Shang, what do we got for him?
We have a great guest, Kevin Constantine, head coach of the Sharks from 1993 to 1995, I believe. And he was the head coach of the Sharks' surprise 1994 playoff team that upset the top-seeded Detroit Red Wings in the first round. And he has some awesome, hilarious Link Gates, Jamie Baker, Igor Larionov, and our favorite, Jaromir Jagr stories. Never a Shark, but those stories are worth it. And anyway, for the last 40 years or so, Constantine has coached everywhere. He's coached somewhere every season. He's coached in Korea. He's coached in Hungary. And he's now the head coach of the WHL's Wenatchee Wild.
So also, before we get to the interview with Kevin, we have a bunch of new Sharks hires, which continues a theme of hiring some ancillary staff over the past year or so under Mike Greer. But let's run through them, and then we'll talk about a couple of them. A couple of names that some people might know. First one is announced was Jack Anderson, who's going to be an assistant strength and conditioning coach. Jaron Burke, he's going to be an amateur scout for the Ontario region.
No relation to Tim.
No relation to Tim, which is a good tidbit. Igor Ironko, if that's how you say his name, an amateur scout for Russia, which is interesting, and we'll talk about. Ryan Miller, famous goaltender for Buffalo Sabres. USA all the way. Excellent goaltender for many years. He's going to be coming on as a goalie scout and goaltending development, which is something we'll talk about because that was a question we had last week, actually. And then Thomas Vanek, his teammate for many years.
Multiple 40 goal scorer, multiple time 40 goal scorer.
Yeah, he's going to be an amateur scout just for the Minnesota region. So really hyper focused on some specific areas, which is interesting for amateur scouting. But let's get into it a little bit. Let's start with Ryan Miller and Thomas Vanek.
Yep. And actually, before we get to Miller and Vanek, I just wanted to jump in and give a shout out to another addition, actually, to the Sharks hockey ops. Wasn't the, we didn't get a press release for it, but anyway, Dylan Finnan, who has been part of Sharks PR for the last couple of years. If you've ever dealt with Dylan, great guy. And anyway, congratulations to Dylan. He is now, he has been for the last couple of months, the Sharks scouting coordinator. And if you look on the Sharks front office directory online, you'll see Dylan's name right there under hockey ops, which I think that's where he wants to go long term. So anyway, big congratulations to Dylan. See you around. It's great dealing with you for the last couple of years. But anyway, on to Miller and Vanek. Of course, Miller and Vanek were both teammates of Mike Greer in Buffalo. Also, too, interesting to note that Ryan Miller and Todd Marchant, who is the director of player development, that they were both in Anaheim at the same time. Miller as a player, as a goalie, ending his career, and Marchant was the director of player development for the Ducks for a long time. So I'm sure that they know each other from that.
Yeah, and last week we had a question on like a state of the Sharks goaltending under Evgeny Nabokov, Sharks director of goaltending.
And Miller, just to remind, it's mentioned in the press release, he will be working under Nabokov, scouting draft eligible goalies and also developing, obviously, the goalies in the Sharks pipeline.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we were mentioning, was that the Sharks hadn't had a win in this department in a while, in the goaltending department, especially from the amateur scouting side. It's been a very long time.
Well, they've got like 700 wins between Nabokov and Miller, so
a lot of wins. And hopefully you're going to find a goaltender for the Sharks in the next. That was also a thing that we thought might happen this year, was that the Sharks might draft a goaltender just because we were a little thin and we had just lost Ben Gaudreau from the system, and then it didn't happen. So interesting that they picked up a specific goalie scout and goaltending development coach. I think that's really interesting. Apart from that, we also have Thomas Vanek, who's joining him as an amateur scout just for the Minnesota region. But I think this kind of kicks off into like a theme of development in some manner. Before we get into that, I looked up a little bit about Igor Ironko, because it seemed like, not that the Sharks didn't scout Russia, because they did, for the last draft.
Nikolai Latikin, and he's been from everything that I understand and hear, he's been a very highly thought of, well regarded scout out there for for a while for the Sharks.
And he was based in Ukraine, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding, and so I think hiring Igor, who we believe lives in Russia, is obviously with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, could be a nice sort of having somebody on the ground in Russia at all times.
Yeah, and he was the assistant general manager for 2 years, and then last year was the director of youth hockey for Avangard Omsk, which is a team based in Omsk, Russia. Again, if I'm mispronouncing everything, I apologize to our Russian listeners that my Russian is not great, but he was the director of youth hockey. There's been a couple of notable draft picks from them over the past 2 years from the Avangard system, like Mikhail Guliayev for Colorado, Gleb Trikazov, Timur Mukanov, both for Carolina. In the past few years. So it's interesting that the Sharks seems like they zeroed in on an area they might not have a scout in, or wanted to add more to that area.
Yeah, in a sensitive time.
In a sensitive time. And that was also something that Alan McCauley on the Alan McCauley episode that kind of got buried in the Erik Karlsson trade news that he mentioned.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah. Sorry, Alan. It was a great interview. Everybody should go listen to it. But he mentioned the importance of having like a scout on the ground in Russia to be able to see these players, and how important it was for their scouting staff to get somebody like Michkov because they had seen him.
And not, everyone assumes that everybody has a Russian scout. That's not the case. And not the Sharks have a Russian scout, Russian area scout, but as I'm not sure how often Latikin was able to go in to Russia last year and see Michkov or any of these other prominent Russian prospects live.
Yeah, and it could just be some speculation, and perhaps he refused it. And it's like, no, I saw Michkov 10 times a week. Like, I went in there all the time, and it was fine. But this is just an interesting ad, I think. But let's talk a little bit more about the broader theme of development that the Sharks seem to be heading towards with all of these ancillary staff hires.
Sure. Before we get to that, though, I want to mention too Igor Aronko. If you're on hockey Twitter like 5 years ago, 7 years ago, like he was the go-to guy for information on KHL or Russian NHLers. And so it's interesting that he also like Dylan is somebody that is transitioning from sort of a different field. I know we have a lot of listeners who are writers or who are amateur sort of video people, and these two guys are examples of moving from, being a journalist or in PR and moving into hockey operations. So I think that's a really cool thing. But anyway, in terms of the theme of development, so I haven't done the full investigation in this, so don't hold this as a 110% factual, accurate, that sort of thing, right? But one of the things that struck me when the Sharks actually, we talked about this when Patrick Marleau was added on as a development coach, and it seemed like, wow, the Sharks were really adding a lot of people kind of in the development area with that development title. And wanted to give you kind of a couple of examples of this, that this is a clear thing that they're doing, and that I assume the budget is being expanded for this a lot over the years. And anyway, right now the Sharks have 6 people that have the development title in hockey operations, and I'm talking about player development specifically, right? And director of player development, obviously Todd Marchant, and 5 different development coaches. They have Mike Ricci and Marleau as development coaches for more of the AHL and younger Sharks, right?
Sure.
They have Tommy Wingos as sort of a development coach for the Sharks forward prospects. So that's, Beasted or somebody more local like Cardwell when he was in the OHL last year. And they have Lucas Spiza as a player development coach for the defensive prospects. So guys like Gannon Larocque. And now they added Ryan Miller, of course. So now you have a goaltending development coach who, not so many goaltenders out there, so I'm sure he'll work with Barracuda goalies, but he'll also work with Mason Beaupit and guys like that,
Sure.
I imagine. And so anyway, 6 guys. And so I suspected that is a high number of people
Seems
with
like
that
it.
development title. And so I just took a quick look, cursory look at the rest of the Pacific Division and their directories. And one of them came up with 0. So I think that's why I caution that I need to fully explore it and make sure that these figures are accurate. But still, though, I think the Sharks number of 6 stands out. Okay, so I looked at the Ducks and they have 2 with that title, as far as I can tell, in their front office directory. And this is like quick research, so I might be missing guys. If you know, let me
Sure.
know. I'm gonna correct myself. But the Flames, I counted 4.
Mhm.
The Oilers accounted 0. And of course, that doesn't mean that the Oilers have 0 investment in development or whatever, right? They may have guys with different titles, guys that
Sure.
might be listed as your assistant general manager or whatever, or as a scout, right? And they're doing different things, though. They also do like development. That's a big part of what they do, too.
I mean, it's Cup or bust in Edmonton. They don't care about development. They're just McDavid, and that's it. I'm kidding.
Maybe, yeah. The Kings actually have 6 too. The Kraken counted 4, and the Golden Knights accounted 1. So again, the Oilers and the Golden Knights figures here, let's a little grain of salt. It doesn't mean that they have little to zero development, but these are just kind of job titles, right? But what is interesting, what I do know about the Sharks, and I can speak more certainly about the Sharks. So back in 2021, I just looked at their media directory or the media guide back, and just to make sure, the Sharks had 2 people with that development coach title or the word development in hockey ops in their title, and that was Mike Ricci, who's still with the Sharks and works with Barracuda forwards, and I assume back then maybe he traveled a little bit, and the younger forwards maybe, I'm not sure. And then Brian Marchment, the late great Brian Marchment, who worked with the defensive prospects, right? And I know I've spoken about this on the podcast a couple of times, and also too, if you listen to interviews we've done with Doug Wilson Jr., his official title was director of scouting, but he did a lot of the things that Todd Marchant does, even though Doug did not have the development title in his job, in his job title. So anyway, so that's when we talk about, again, going back to the Oilers and Golden Knights having 0 or 1 person listed, that's an example of that. It's not like the Sharks didn't care about development for the last 10, 15, 20 years or whatever, right?
Sure.
So anyway, though, there is still, regardless though, that like, okay, instead of having Doug Wilson Jr. doing kind of 3, 4 jobs, 2 jobs or whatever, right? You have the jobs are split now. The Sharks have a director of amateur scouting, Chris Morehouse. They have they have a director of player development in Todd Marchant. So you see kind of like these titles are split up here, whereas the old Sharks, right? There, you can say there's pluses and minuses of each sort of approach, but they ran a little bit lean. So anyway, I just wanted to illustrate that. Again, this is just a cursory look, but you can see kind of that the Sharks are definitely investing more in development.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination, like you said. Maybe they have different titles for those other players or other staff across the Pacific Division. The other thing is the Sharks probably for a long time were just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. Where they had somebody taking care of the Barracuda or or the Worcester Sharks. And if it wasn't broke, they didn't find a reason to actually change it.
They ran lean and it worked for a long time.
And then it didn't. And they realized they needed a change, which I think is a good thing that Greer has done in the past year or so, is recognize that maybe the development hasn't been so great for the past couple of years. So the Sharks in this new era really need a lot of players to hit. So I like the hires. I think that's really interesting.
Speaking of development or lack of, our next news item.
The crux of development, the epitome of what in the world do we do with this kind of player? Ryan Merkley. Ryan Merkley, as you may or may not know, former first-round pick for the Sharks in 2018.
2018, yep.
Yep, he was somewhere in the 20s, I think 21.
21, he was 21, yeah.
Yeah, 21st overall. he had an up and down career. We'll call it that with the Sharks and Barracuda. We'll call it mostly down, but a little.
Yeah, you're being very kind, but
I like
that's cool.
But anyway, he was eventually traded in the Martin Kaut trade, another interesting player, but he was traded mid-season right after Christmas or so. And anyways, back to Ryan Merkley. This year, he wasn't signed by Colorado. He wasn't offered
this offseason,
this offseason, and then went unsigned the past 2 months or so. And then recently, today, just signed a 1-year contract with the KHL, the Russian Hockey League's Kunlun Red Star, which is the KHL's team in Beijing, China, which is interesting.
I'm not clear how I gotta look it up. They've been kind of they don't play all their games in China. They've had home base, home base. But anyway, though, but yeah, on this signing, well, first of all, good luck to Ryan. I mean, I hope he really kills it in the KHL. Maybe that's better for his skill set, and maybe he can come back. You know, like a couple of years ago, if guys who have been reading San Jose hockey now for a long time. I think it was the 2020 rookie faceoff or 2021. Anyway, though. I was talking to scouts there, and the comp that they had for Ryan was Eric Gustafsson, and that wasn't I don't know if that went over well with Sharks fans back then, because they were, for a long time, Ryan Merkley was the Sharks' best prospect, top prospect for a long time, for maybe lack of better options, but he was the top prospect. And anyway, so in regards to Eric Gustafsson comp, Gustafsson is a guy that famously can put up points, but can't do really a lot else. He was just signed, even though he's capable of putting up 40, 50 points, he was just signed to almost a minimum contract that this past summer with the Islanders. I think like $825,000. And so anyway, not a player that is, necessarily you think of like, oh yeah, that was a great first round pick right there, right? But he is a useful NHL player who is really, really good at a couple of specific things, offense, running the power play, very important things too. And so that's why he can, even with his limitations as a defender, he can still get NHL work consistently. And so anyway, now though, right, with that comp with Merkley, I'm sure that Sharks fans will be thrilled 2 years later if he was as good as Gustafsson. And so hopefully Ryan, who's still very young, obviously, can develop his game there and come back and maybe hit that mark.
Yeah, I think Merkley, and I've written about Merkley on San Jose Hockey now. It was one of the first, I think it was the first article I put out for that. And actually, one of the first conversations that we had on the phone over a year ago, where you asked me about Ryan Merkley, because we just went through like the Sharks prospects, and you asked me like, this was after Ryan Merkley publicized, didn't make the Sharks roster after pretty much everybody, myself included, thought that he would make the Sharks team.
Oh, sure. The Europe trip. He didn't make the Europe trip.
Yeah, he didn't make the Euro trip. He actually played decent at the end of the previous year in the Sharks. I mean, like not amazing, but like I'm shaking. Anyway, I thought he would make the Sharks because they just didn't really have a lot of options after they traded Brent Burns.
They didn't have a lot of options. That part is true.
So anyways, you asked me a question. You were like, what is this was probably in like November timeframe of last year. You were like, what does you think about Ryan Merkley? And as I was answering it, I heard the words come out of my mouth. I was just like, I don't think he's long for the Sharks. And like, as I was saying it, I was like, oh man, I just realized that like 2 months before I was thinking he might make the Sharks. And then after watching him again in the AHL, it just wasn't there. And the whole year last year, per Merkley, it just wasn't coming together. He just didn't play well offensively or defensively. So, we were hoping that with the trade that maybe when he got to Colorado that there would be a change in his game. Didn't really happen. And then now he has to adjust his game to a whole new continent and see if he can put it all together there.
I got to be honest. So when we talked last November, if you had been trying to pump up Ryan Merkley to me and tell me how you're still going to work out, look at the point projections, I honestly wouldn't have hired you as a video analysis guy.
I figured so.
Anybody who has watched his video seriously over the last couple of years, I've talked to nobody who thinks like, oh, this guy is an NHL. This guy is going to be a star. That sort of thing. I'm talking about NHL scouts, obviously guys who aren't in the NHL either. But not one person has looked at his video, just looked at his video as playing, thought, oh, this is a guy that is going to be a top 4 NHL defenseman, great offensively, with some limitations defensively, but he's not even that at the NHL level at this point. Hopefully he comes back and does that. Hopefully he, proves me wrong. But anyway, that was the Merkley test. So
yeah, the Merkley test. No, it's pretty apparent that his defense is just so porous and the effort isn't there. And then
the
his
offense isn't good enough either.
Isn't there either. Yeah,
at least at the highest level.
So this will be interesting because hopefully, because Kunlun is famously a horrible KHL team. Like I think they're the bottom 2 of the KHL. It's them and Sochi are really, really bad.
Put up points, baby.
Maybe if you just give Merkley the puck and you just let him go and play mini Erik Karlsson, maybe he's going to put up 60 points next year. Who knows?
You can have 100 points and a minus 26 like EA 65. And before you kill me, I know most of that minus 26 was from empty net goals. I wrote that a lot. So
yeah, I think I'm going to put the over/under on minus for Merkley at 35. Minus 35. I think I'm going to put it at that because Kunlun is so bad.
They don't play as many games though as the NHL.
That's true. So. I'll put minus 30. Then we'll go 30. But I'll go with that. But anyways, wish Merkley the best, and there is a chance that later on he comes back. I mean, Gustafsson is later in his career.
He's still young, yeah. So
that would be the comp though. Is just a power play specialist, not great defensively.
No one expects him to ever be great defensively. He can be, usable there, and he gets really good offensively. I'm talking about NHL good offensively, not
not Kunlun,
OHL good. Yeah, not Kunlun. Yeah, but there's a shot. He does do things, and I will say that about his time with the Sharks, like not to totally beg on his time with the Sharks. He was not good defensively. That I watched that. There's no way that he belonged in NHL. He might be in NHL for a bad team like the Sharks, but he didn't belong there. He's one of those guys in the Doug Wilson era at the end there, were just giving guys, playing time, like candy, whether or not they really belong there or not. But Ryan did do, and we did see it, and it was, I'm not a hater. Like I saw it too. Like every couple games or so, he would do something that only he could do pretty much. And I'm talking about NHL wide. Like maybe he could do it, Erik Karlsson could do it, and maybe like a handful of other guys. Some pass, float some area pass that. So that's a real ability he has. Hopefully he can do that more, be a little better defensively, and get his way back here.
Yep, and I think it's time to move on. It's just the theme of this summer is moving on, and Merkley was one of the last holdouts of hope. There was for turning the franchise around quickly. If Merkley somehow hit and became our next Erik Karlsson, it's all going to be great, going to be gravy. It never happened. So. Anyways, let's move on. We have a lot of new players that were added to the Sharks this year, or this offseason, actually, just a couple weeks, that I think we should talk a little bit about. We did a little bit of a touch on it when we did the Erik Karlsson trade, but let's go and do it. Let's talk about the 3 players that came back from Erik Karlsson trade in Granlund, Hoffman, and Jan Rutta.
Yeah, and I wanted to add some insight that I got from an NHL scout recently, and so just something that give you a sense of what the league. It's one man's opinion, but what the league. What the industry consensus on these guys is. And let's start really quickly with Mikael Granlund. And obviously, Granlund struggled last year in Pittsburgh, but before that, though, he was really good for a number of years in Nashville and Minnesota. And in terms of just recent really good tape in 2021-22, I just wrote about this. He was Predators' most used forward, more than Philip Forsberg and Johansson and Duchesne, right? And that was a playoff Predators team too. That was not a average or bad Predators team. And so for Granlund to lead all forwards in ice time, he was a regular both on the power play and penalty kill. So anyway, what this scout tells me of Granlund last year is that he still thinks that Granlund is a good player, and obviously overpaid right now at $5 million AAV, but he doesn't think that Granlund's game actually really fell that much. I mean, obviously he wasn't good in Pittsburgh, but that could be an adjustment thing. And the scout reminded me, and Granlund has mentioned it too, that Granlund had a difficult time adjusting when he got traded to Minnesota, Nashville also at the deadline, and similar kind of story unfolded Nashville to Pittsburgh, and so maybe he's just one of those guys that maybe that just is like a tough move for him. I don't know. We don't know for sure on that. And now he has a different move now, but he has a little more time to prepare. But though, this scout really does like Granlund, values the playmaking and versatility.
Sure.
And sees him as a complimentary guy, and so needs to play with the best players. And so I had thought that maybe Granlund could settle in as being a 3C. Maybe that's not the best idea for him, because he may not be playing with the Sharks' best wingers at third line center. So maybe play him with play him at wing. Granlund can play wing too. But anyway, so I thought that was good insight on Granlund. He is signed for 2 more years, but he's not, at least based on his on ice ability, he's not exactly a pure, salary dump. It sounds like he can be really good. And if he's close to as good as he was just 2 years ago, again, led the Preds forwards in ice time, and he had 53 assists, career high 53 assists, 64 points. The Sharks will take that.
Yeah. And like you said, the trade and from Minnesota to Nashville, then from Nashville to Pittsburgh, both times when he was traded, he had 5 points after the trade and looked bad. So when he came to Nashville, he had 5 points in 16 games, and he went to Pittsburgh at 5 points in 20 games. But then he rebounded over finding his groove with Nashville, up to 64 points in a year 2 years ago. So I think it's a guy with skill. It's a guy that's versatile. Can play center, can play wing, and somebody that, the Sharks don't have a lot of these kind of guys that can play both positions. They got a lot of wingers, and they have a few centers.
And also not a lot of guys who are really good two-way. Granlund, I don't care what the charts. I saw some anyway. Granlund is a good two-way player. He wouldn't be used as he's been over the last couple of years. And so along with Couture, Hurdle, those are some good, guys who are, very good offensively, very good defensively.
Yeah, 3C Granlund isn't that bad, I think. And then Sturm is your 4C. That's like a pretty good center group, I think. If everything
look at it that
obviously,
way,
Granlund's got to pick his game back up and find his new home. But it's possible that it's a deeper forward group than the Sharks have had for the past few years because of the additions of Granlund and our next guy, Mike Hoffman.
Right. And Mike Hoffman, this scout was not as in love with or didn't like Hoffman as much, probably because Hoffman is, he does a couple things really well. He can shoot. On a power play, he's useful, right? But obviously, the last couple of years for Hoffman, he's fallen off quite a bit. From 2014 to 2021, Hoffman was scoring at, I believe, a 30-goal pace over those 7 years or so, 82-game 30-goal pace. So he was a very, very good goal scorer in his day, but the last couple of years he's also 33. He has only scored 29 goals, and obviously 29 goals over the last 2 years, and obviously 29 goals for, let's say, Nico Sturm scores 29 goals over 2 years. That's great because Nico Sturm adds so many other things besides some goal scoring, right? But a guy like Hoffman that doesn't have much more than a goal scoring, if he's not scoring goals, he's not really helping you much. And so anyway, this scout thinks that more of a perimeter guy. That's what he thinks of Hoffman. And so unless Hoffman can pick up the goal scoring again, he may not end up being quite as valuable as I expect Granlund to be pretty valuable. Hoffman, we'll see. He needs to get back to a 25 goals scoring pace or so.
Yeah, it could be the situation where Granlund rebuilds his value enough that next year, because Granlund's here next year, that he does actually have some value at a trade deadline kind of thing. Whereas Hoffman, he might get a flyer from a team.
Yeah, 1 year. It's got 1 year left.
Yeah, it's got 1 year left. So maybe at the trade deadline, somebody needs a power play specialist or a shooter. It's possible.
But he better be scoring though. If he's scoring at the 15 goal clip, I don't think he's going to be very tradable. So he's got to be.
True.
The Sharks have to pump up his value. He's PP1 for sure. So.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of like our version of Kevin LeBanc, but just a little bit. But obviously better and a better shooter. But like soft, skilled perimeter player who does mostly power play, but not a lot else. That sounds like LeBanc, just better, or was better in his career than LeBanc has been. But and obviously Hoffman's 33 now, I think. So Father Time will catch up to him as well. So I don't know.
And it might have already. We'll see.
They might have already. Yeah, it seemed kind of like he was the throw in from the whole trade.
Oh, for sure. They just needed to clear cap. Yeah. So
yeah, they cleared cap, and then they ended up
question about
trading
that.
Jeff Petrie or Petrie afterwards, which is interesting too. Because if you think about it, like, could the Sharks have just taken Petrie and left Hoffman in Montreal and then eventually traded Petrie anyway? But it seems like he was like, absolutely not. I don't want to go to San Jose.
Just in case the Sharks couldn't flip him, maybe.
Exactly. In case they couldn't flip him.
Yeah,
So. And they would have had to retain for 2 more years. And yeah. So interesting things that happened with that. Our last player that came in that trade basically was Jan Rutta or Rutta. Still need to get confirmation on pronunciation for that. But what do scouts have to say about him?
Rutta is actually very, very much liked by the scouting community. He is a, hard to play against right-handed defenseman, right? And obviously has won 2 Stanley Cups and is sort of a model, he's a bottom pairing defenseman, so let's not get ahead of ourselves, but he's a model bottom pairing defenseman. And, that sounds like a backhanded compliment, but it isn't, though. Every guy on a team, on a good team, has a role. And so Jan Rutta, shouldn't be your top pairing. He might be a top pairing defenseman for the Sharks, and he probably shouldn't be. But when he plays his 15 minutes a night, to 17 minutes a night for Tampa Bay, when he was in Tampa Bay, he excelled in those, and they won a Stanley Cup. And so I don't get any sense that Rutta was, he had some injuries with Pittsburgh, but he wasn't poor for them. He just, a little bit overpriced. $2.75 million for the next 2 years is a bit high for a bottom pairing guy, even if it's a really good bottom pairing guy. But nonetheless, though, the guy can still play, and so he's a guy that's going to help out the Sharks. And I could see him, taking on a larger role, kind of like Matt Benning did last year, and being competent at it. And so, so I look forward to seeing what he adds.
Yeah, he's like a guy that if he was in your third pairing as a Stanley Cup contender, you would be doing well. I think he would be fine there if you can afford him. He's not that expensive. He's in the $2 million range in his salary.
Yeah, 2.75.
Yeah, 2.75. But if a team can afford him in your third pairing, then it's great. If he's your second pairing or your first pairing, then he might not be a Stanley Cup contending team, but he still could, have value at a trade deadline if the Sharks want to go that route. If they also give him a lot of minutes and his point production goes up too, that always helps.
He did score, I think, 20 points in his rookie year in like 57 games for the Blackhawks, and he did get some power play time back then because that was his first year coming from the Czech League, and he was an offensive defenseman in the Czech League. And so if you can replicate that point production with the Sharks, he's going to be a bit more movable because someone would be like, oh, there's a little bit of offense there that we didn't know was there. So, and like he joked, he seems like he's a guy that's going to be a great quote. He joked that, I'm going to try out a couple of clappers and see if I still got it.
He's got
when
it.
I asked him about maybe playing on the power play. So
I love it. No, I can't. I'm excited to see. These are interesting pieces, but it's we're gonna have to find bright spots for the Sharks this season. So.
Yeah, we're gonna need to. So trying our best here, guys.
Yep. So, anyways, I think that's all of the news for this week for the Sharks. Merkley got signed in the KHL. We had a lot of ancillary staff hires, which is awesome. Development coaches, which is awesome. And I hope you guys enjoy. This is an awesome interview with Kevin Constantine. It's a little long, but it's a very funny thing if you listen to it all the way through. He's got some great stories to tell. So,
bye, guys.
See you guys. See you next week.
You might know Kevin Constantine as the head coach of the San Jose Sharks' surprise 1994 playoff run. They upset the top-seeded Detroit Red Wings in the first round. You might also remember that Constantine coached the Jaromir Jagr Pittsburgh Penguins and the Martin Brodeur New Jersey Devils. But you might not know that Constantine has kept coaching after the NHL in places like Korea, France, Poland, Hungary, and Switzerland. For the last, I believe, 37 years, Constantine has coached somewhere every season, and he's now the coach of the WHL's Wenatchee Wild. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Is it a 37 straight years we're talking here? That's what I counted on elite prospects, but
it's a big enough number that it's hard to remember. If you count a couple of years where I was just a volunteer coach, kind of earning my stripes in the business, it's right around 40 years.
Okay. Well, let's jump into it here. And in 1990-91, before 1991, the San Jose Sharks, you actually were coaching in Kalamazoo and places like that. You're assistant coach. Also, you're a head coach in USHL. But in 1991, you were actually offered the assistant coach job for the expansion San Jose Sharks. Why didn't you take that? Because instead, you opted to go to Kansas City to be the head coach of the IHL team.
Yeah, I had been an assistant in Kalamazoo in the IHL, which at that time was the Minnesota North Stars farm team. And then, of course, for those hockey historians, the North Stars actually split into the Dallas Stars and the San Jose Sharks. And that was when I was offered a chance to go be an assistant in the NHL or become the San Jose Sharks farm team head coach in Kansas City in the IHL. And I just had been an assistant for 3 years, and my head was buzzing with ideas, things I wanted to try, ideas I thought might work. And the only way that I could kind of do that was to go back to being a head coach and try some of those things. And that was real intriguing, appealing to me. So that's why the decision was made.
What were some of those ideas?
Oh, I think when I started coaching, and I wanted to try to, improve myself, educate myself, furthering education. I didn't play in the NHL, and I didn't really have a network of coaches in the NHL. So a lot of what I learned about coaching came from reading books, and a lot of it came from football, basketball. Bill Walsh with the 49ers back in the day. Phil Jackson coaching the Bulls. As far back as reading a book on Bo Schembechler at University of Michigan. And so, there's just coaching philosophies that are universal to every sport. John Wooden and his pyramid. You see it on Ted Lasso. If you're following Ted Lasso right now, that John Wooden pyramid is on the background of the coach's board. And so, I developed my own hockey, John Wooden's version for hockey. And I've used it for years. And so all of those ideas, I wanted to try to implement them, see if they applied to hockey. And so those were some of the things that I wanted to do.
Well, I had to ask you, what's the difference between your pyramid of success versus John Wooden's?
Well, I'll tell you how it kind of got converted. When I left the Sharks, my next head coaching job was the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I tried a couple unique things there. Craig Patrick was the GM. And when he hired me, I said, I want an assistant coach in charge of all of the areas of our game, kind of like football. I want a penalty kill coach. I want a power play coach. I want a defensive coordinator who watches how we play defense. I want an offensive coordinator who watches how we play offense. And the idea of having 4 assistants at the NHL, in fact, a lot of the things I've done were unheard of kind of when I did them.
Back then there's only like 1 or 2 assistants, right?
There was 1, maybe 2. I wanted 4. And I remember Craig saying to me, he said, well, you can have as many as you want, but the budget for the assistant coaches is going to remain unchanged. So in other words, if I could find guys to come in at the right price and the budget didn't change, he didn't care how many guys I had. So we tried that. We had 4 assistant coaches, probably first time ever in the NHL. And when I got those coaches together, and they were all, respected ex-players or respected coaches, I asked them, what do you want to do? And we just went up to a whiteboard, and I said, what do you like about a team? What makes a good team? And we just started putting every idea down. If someone said discipline, or someone said unity, or someone said a skill, or someone said offense, or someone said a good power play, we wrote it all down. And when we were done writing it all down, if you looked at the whiteboard, it was full. But it seemed like random ideas, just kind of, throwing darts at a dartboard, just all kinds of things all over the board. It looked great, but it was messy.
Mm-hmm.
And so then my next question to the coaches was, well, how do we make that simple? So we had all these ideas from all the assistant coaches on the whiteboard, but it was, like darts hitting a dartboard. It was just kind of thrown up there. And so it was great. It was a lot of ideas, but it was kind of messy too. So, my next question to the coaches was, how do we present this to the players in a way that is simple, makes sense, easy to apply? And that's where the idea of the John Wooden pyramid came in. And we established kind of a way of looking at hockey in a pyramid form that,
Mm-hmm.
has been used religiously by myself with all the teams I've coached, but I think also, borrowed and used by, kind of my coaching tree. And by that, I mean all the guys that have been assistants for me that have gone on now, to do some pretty good things. There's two of my assistants that now are, NHL assistants, Jay Verity in Detroit and Mitch Love in Washington. So these ideas have become something that's made teaching the game a lot easier. Kind of a basketball concept, kind of adapted and applied to hockey.
And before you got to San Jose, you're of course with the Kansas City Blades, and you had a tremendous success there, winning the Turner Cup in 1992, and eventually in 1993-94, you took over the San Jose Sharks.
Yeah, it was fun. I had won a championship in junior. And then we took over the Blades, and they were in last place the year before I got there, and we won our first 10 games. And then that team went on and won a championship also that year. So my first kind of two head coaching jobs, I had won championships both years. So
good start.
But my next year in Kansas City, we weren't quite as good as the first year, and we hit a stretch where we lost like 6 or 7 in a row, and so it was kind of my first hiccup coaching where I'm like, wow, everything we had done had kind of turned into a championship, so it was kind of magical, and then all of a sudden you're losing, and you're like, oh, well, I guess I don't know everything about coaching right now, and when I look back, that experience was really, really valuable. Learning how to get out from under that winning streak, because despite the fact the Sharks, my first year there, had, end of season success beating Detroit in the playoffs, we started that year 0-8-1.
Right.
We only ended up with a tie out of our first 9 games. And had I not gone through that experience the year before in the minors, it might have been impossible to kind of dig ourselves out from that hole. But the experience the year before gave me, some ideas and some tools that were helpful the next year when our season started in San Jose pretty slow.
And before we get to your time in San Jose, I had to ask you, your time in Kalamazoo, one of the players that played for you was Link Gates. The infamous Link Gates. What was it like coaching him, or and just any other like Sharks before the Sharks in Kalamazoo when it was still a Minnesota farm team?
you know, there's so many stories. One of the, and I don't remember a lot of them. My wife says, you know, at 64 that I got, you know, early onset dementia, which I hope is just a wife giving her husband crap and not real. It might be. So I forget so many of the stories, and sometimes you feel bad because you've coached so many players and you forget a player here or there. But one that would be impossible to forget is Link. You know, and the stories are endless, but so many of them are R-rated that you don't.
It's okay. Really you can tell us. You can tell us. It's fine.
You know, you don't even really want to tell them. You got to get the children out of the room before you start telling the stories.
I'm covering my ears.
And I think I had probably more experience with those stories than any other person. I mean, you know, there's probably 20 unbelievable stories about Link. And so you would think that involves 20 different people, but I think I'm in the middle of about 5 or 6 of those 20 stories. So I think I lead the world in being related to Link's stories, you know. So it was, you know, I mean, which story do I tell? You know, I was in Kalamazoo. We had 3 goaltenders for a stretch of our season. The third guy was Johnny Blue, a California kid, I believe. Who played for the University of Minnesota and played a little bit of pro. Being the third goalie and not getting a lot of game time, he always wanted to go out early and get extra practice time before practice even started. And so I would often go out and, you know, whatever players came on the ice first, I'd grab the player and we'd get 10 or 15 minutes of drills in for Johnny just because he didn't get a lot of action in games. And this particular practice, Link came out early for practice. And we had already set up a pile of pucks at the top of one of the circles in the end zone, another pile in the middle, another pile on the other top of the circle. And those piles were all set up so when players came on, we could take some shots on the goaltender. Link came on the ice and he went over to the first pile of pucks and he put his stick in the middle of them. And, you know, with a swoop of his stick, he spread those pucks all over the rink. And, you know, we said, Link, leave the pucks. We're going to use them for drills for the goalie. Just leave the pucks alone. And so he went over to the second pile of pucks and he put his stick in front of the pucks and he just shot them all over the ice with another swoop of his stick. So now Johnny, who has spent time organizing all those pucks, is really upset. And he's, you know, now he's kind of yelling at Link a little bit. And, you know, telling him, don't. No, these are our pucks. Leave them alone. And now there's anger. And Link just went over to the third pile of pucks and spread those all over the ice. So Johnny, who's, you know, I don't know, he's my size. He's 5'10", 180-pound guy. And Link is, you know, a giant.
Mm-hmm.
So Johnny Blue, a goaltender with no fighting experience, drops his gloves, the goalie glove, the trapper, and squares off to fight Link. And Link just looks at him like, you know, are you kidding me? And so Link picks up Johnny Blue's blocker, put it on his hand, grabbed Johnny with his left free hand, and kind of beat the crap out of him with Johnny's own blocker, punching him in the head with the blocker. Yeah, so
they were on the same. Yeah, everybody listening, they were on the same team. So this is at practice.
They're on the same team. They're on. Yeah, you know. So this is, you know, this is, and I got 100 of them. You know, we could go Link Gates for the whole podcast.
Change the name. I guess going back to
the San Jose Sharks. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to that head coaching job, where basically the Sharks franchise had only won 28 games in its previous 2 seasons? It was a really, really new franchise. Players from that team said you added discipline to that team. What do you think about that? How did you do that, or what was your approach, do you think?
Well, you know, when I came there, there was quite a few players that had been with the team the first couple of years, and you know, it had been loss. So it hadn't been good. There hadn't been much winning. And in my opening speech, you know, I told them, you know, we're not here just so we can say, hey, we had a few years in the NHL. You know, we're here to win a Stanley Cup. And, you know, some of the guys in the room told me after we beat Detroit in the playoffs, when they looked back on the season, they said to me, hey, when you said in the room, we were all laughing in the back of the room. Because, you know, the team was not a joke, but they didn't win much, right? The first 2 years. So, you know, I think one thing that you to have success at anything in life, anything, you got to say it's possible. You got to believe it's possible. You got to speak like it's possible. You got to speak the way people that would win would speak. And so I hope I was part of planting a seed with the organization that, you know, if you do certain things right, good things follow. And, you know, certainly the discipline, the ability. I mean, you can't win without discipline, and you can't really win without good defense either. Now, it shouldn't be the only thing you're trying to do in hockey, because you need offense too. But even this year, if you go back and watch Vegas beat Florida in the playoffs, and you go back to some really important shot blocking that happened when Florida had opportunities, it probably goes a bit unnoticed by some fans who, you know, are more enthralled with great moves and the great plays and the great shots and the fights, and they might miss the importance of a congestion of the slot in your own end of the ice, where you don't give the offensive team any room to make plays. But so those are some of the things I think, you know, we helped establish. The goals against went down by over 100. So we learned how to work. We learned how to play defense. We learned how to believe. So I think those are some of the key fundamental things that were put in place in year 3 of the organization.
How do you get the guys to play defense? You know, playing time, was that the carrot, or what other ways did you kind of use to get guys that maybe struggled defensively the year before? You know, the previous year Sharks team only won 11 games. So how did you get those guys to kind of turn that part around?
Well, a couple things. One is the first 2 years lack of success was the motivation for them to listen to me. Because, you know, everybody wants to be successful. And so when they lacked success the first 2 years, I think they were willing to listen to a different way of doing things. And so that was helpful. I came in at the right moment where players were willing to listen. But, you know, and it was probably in 3 years ago in your article that we've talked about that you put out, but you know, there was a group there that wouldn't play defense even when I got there, and it was you know, and so Larionov, Makarov, they came in and they listened to almost nothing that I was coaching, and the reason they listened to nothing is they had already been part of, you know, the KLM line or Russian hockey or the most successful team in the world. So why would the most successful team in the world want to listen to a rookie coach who was only 1 year older and had never played in the NHL? They had no interest in listening to me. They didn't believe in what I was saying. And so, when we went 0-8-1, what I had learned from the year before is don't give up on your basics, don't give up on your fundamentals. But when things aren't working, you've got to be willing to try something different and experiment a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that lesson I had learned the year before when I coached the Kansas City Blades, and partly out of frustration, I took all the players that wouldn't listen to me, and of them: Sandis Lynch, Jeff Norton, Johan Garpenlov, Igor Larionov, Sergei Makarov. And I said, listen, to Wayne Thomas, who was one of my assistant coaches, I said, you're now the head coach of that group of five. I said, they don't want to do it my way. They want to do it their way. So let's just let them do it their way. And my only thing is they can't go minus. They can have whatever style, but if they're going minus during the game, well, then I'm coming in and I'm going to make some comments to them. And in doing that group became, I think, maybe one of the best or the best group of five players on the ice as a group in the whole league. And by the time we hit Detroit in the playoffs, they looked like, the Russian group of five, that included Fetisov and Constantine on defense with the KLM line.
Yeah, Fedorov,
So sometimes coaching is not everything you know. Sometimes coaching is an admission you don't know, and you got to get out of the way of some players. You just got to get out of their way and let them do their thing. So it was success through failure in terms of that group being able to be as good as they were.
That's such a fascinating decision to me. It's just not something you hear about in coaching today, or even coaching in the past, where you have these group of very talented guys, but who aren't really quite with the program. You actually, instead of trying to, put circle pegs into a square hole or whatever, you kind of let them do their own thing. Where did you even think that to even try something like that? Because I haven't seen anything like that before.
Well, I forget the saying, but success has many fathers. In other words, if you have success, everybody takes ownership of it, and failure is an orphan. And nobody wants to talk about their failures. It wasn't done through any form of brilliance at all. It was done through trial and error and failure. It was, this isn't working, let's do something different. They're not listening, but they've had success. Let's let them try to have success the way they grew up having success. Actually, if you listen to Mike Sullivan's comments just recently in acquiring Carlson from the Sharks, he kind of says the same thing. He said two things in a fairly long question and answer session about the trade. He said two things that stuck out to me. He said many things. One, he says, I don't want to take away Carlson's instincts. I want him to be able to play the game the way he feels the game. But then he also said, we demand accountability defensively from all of our players. So there's certain basics of playing the game defensively that everybody has to uphold. And so there's the magic. The magic is in trying to give enough liberty in certain parts of the game so that a player can take everything he's learned and all his instincts playing and still utilize those. But at the same time, collectively, everybody's on the same page, especially a little bit even more on the defensive side of it, so that we also have a team game because you have to have both. You have to have the power of team, your systems and your structure, but you need individual difference makers that, are the guys when the score's tied and the systems are even, that just single-handedly and individually with their skill, McKinnon, McDavid, Crosby, et cetera, can go do things. And so you don't want to take away those instincts from the individual players either.
Sure, sure. And how did they play differently than the rest of your team? You know, Larionov, Makarov, Garpenlov, Norton, and Ozolinsh. Just how was your style different?
Well, it's summed up in Larionov's comments to me when I was trying to teach the way I wanted the team to play, of which, you know, defense wasn't being weighted more than offense, but we certainly wanted to play 50% of the game, which is the amount of time you don't have the puck. You want that 50% to be done right. That's the defensive side of the game. So we're only talking about half of the game, but nonetheless, a very important half. So when I would instruct the team on what to do in those situations, and Igor didn't want to do those things, you know, he came to me on the side in my office or in the hallway or you know, after practice on the sideboards, and we talked. And he said, and this was his broken English: "Best defense is offense yours." That was his favorite saying to me. Hey, Kevin, best defense is offense yours. And the translation into real English is, you know, if you have the puck and you're on offense, you don't need to play defense. And so their idea was, please give us the puck. We're going to keep it so long and so much that it'll be very seldom that we ever actually have to play defense. So please let us do what we want with the puck. Let us control it more. Let us regroup instead of you know, dumping a puck in.
Sure.
Let us go back and start over the way the Russians did on the big ice sheet for years and years. So that was something that, you know, we had to kind of give them a little more liberty when we wanted the other three lines on the team to do it based on their skill set and our strategy. We had to open the door that we were going to do many things as a team, but we were going to leave room for some individuality within that team plan.
And, you know, a danger of something like this, it would seem to me, is that other guys on the team might be like, wait, how come they get to do this and we have to do that? So, you know, was there any resentment that you had to navigate from the other Sharks that the Larionov line sort of had their own rules?
Yeah, good question. And I think I'd be making up the answer. In other words, you know, there could have been some grumbling, you know, going on behind the scenes that I might have even been somewhat unaware of because we allowed them to have kind of a different plan. But this is where, you know, this is where the leadership group in your locker room is really, really, really critical. Your leadership group, you know, has to be able to kind of lead by doing their job. That's kind of priority number one. You can't lead unless you're out there doing your job. And leadership factor number two is you have to care about the results of the team more than you care about the individual performance of yourself. And we did have some pretty good, you know, some pretty good leaders with, you know, Bob Erie, Jeff Odgers. So I think we had enough leadership in the room that, you know, even Jamie Baker was you know, the funny leader on our team. And so I think we had enough character and leadership on the team. And I think the motivation was, man, we sucked for 2 years. Let's just do what we got to do to be respectable in this league. And it turned into, you know, even a little more than respect. It turned into, you know, a playoff upset in a second round with Toronto that went to the seventh round. So it turned into even probably more than they even expected.
Can you describe a little bit of the local excitement surrounding that playoff run? The city of San Jose actually threw a parade for that team after a loss in the second round, which is pretty unique, I'd say. I mean, it was obviously a huge step forward for the franchise.
Yeah, I was unhappy about the parade. Happy and unhappy. Happy because something nice happened for San Jose. Happy because people wanted to kind of celebrate. a huge, top 10 ever upset in the league. Happy for the players and their success, but really unhappy because, of the tradition. You don't do that. You celebrate a Stanley Cup and a championship. So it didn't make sense to me, but they wanted, to do that. So good. So what specifically do you want to talk about that? Ask me your question again.
What just the excitement level though around the town though. One of the things is, yes, you don't usually have a parade after a second round loss, but on the other hand though, that Sharks team, I think, really put the Sharks on the map in San Jose. That was the first year of the new arena too, and so it became San Jose's team that year. Prior 2 years they were playing in Daly City in San Francisco in the Cal Palace. So there seemed like there's just reading the stories from back then that there just was a ton of excitement just locally. Did you see that around town? Did more people recognize you once the playoffs started? Things like that.
Well, I mean, if you go back, we were 0-8-1 to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the fans looked at that and said, well, the first coach came in, or the first 2 years were bad, so they changed the coach. So now it's supposed to get better, and all it did is get way worse. Because 0-8-1 was way worse than the first 2 years. So I'm sure everybody is like, what is going on? Now there was the new arena. And the first time San Jose had a major sports team. So there was enough fan adrenaline, excitement to kind of survive all of that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately we needed to survive on the ice too, and not just have it be because it's new, that it's exciting. But we kind of, we made some changes, some adjustments. The Larionov-Makarov group of 5 came on. And so we kept getting better. We kept improving. We made little changes. We started winning. And then, we started winning enough that, we realized there's an outside, probably never happen, but there's an outside chance we could make the playoffs. But we're going to have to win, a lot of games in the second half of the season to make the playoffs. And, that kind of started happening a little bit. And, one thing I'll never forget is there's the movie, the biggest movie, or one of the biggest movies that had just come out was Dumb and Dumber.
Okay.
There's two interesting parts of that. One, I'm in the credits of that movie.
I didn't know that.
If you ever watch the movie and stay long enough and look at the section of the credits where it says party goers, you'll see my name in there. The only reason I'm in that is my college roommate is one of the Farley brothers.
Oh, sure.
Made all kinds of movies.
They're big hockey fans too.
Him and I were both freshman goaltenders at RPI.
Okay.
The same year, and so we both kind of flunked out of the college coaching business, but we both kind of had success in our own way. Him in the movies, and a little bit of me, I guess, coaching. But the interesting part of that winning that put us in the playoffs, or as we were winning enough to think maybe we can make the playoffs, there's a line in the movie where George, I think is the character, correct me if I'm wrong, but he makes this big spiel to the girl in the movie.
Mm-hmm. It's a Jim Carrey to Lauren Holly. Yeah.
Yeah, Jim Carrey's character is talking to Holly, and he fumbles the, asking her out, just completely blows the line. And she says, is there a chance? And she goes, well, maybe like 1 in a million. And he takes that as a positive. And he answers back to her, so you're saying there's a chance.
Right.
Yep.
And he's all excited about that, if you remember the movie.
Yep.
And
Of course.
so when we would win a game down the stretch, which was putting us a little closer to the playoffs, we'd win and we'd come in the locker room and everybody would kind of wait till everybody came in. You know, you got the 3 stars and maybe a media interview or something, but we'd wait till 100% of the players were back in the locker room. And then Jamie Baker would get up and go in the middle of the locker room and he'd say, "So you're saying there's a chance." And that's how we ended every game. And so there was this vibe that was being formed in the room that took on its own momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we became because of that, I think we became even a little better than maybe even our numbers would have indicated or our talent would have indicated. But, you know, another really interesting story from that season is now we actually made the playoffs and it's time to, you know, play Detroit, right? There's two pretty, one's funny, one's real. The funny part is about 2 weeks before the playoffs were going to start, we played Detroit in a regular season game. And so they were in San Jose to play us, and they stayed at whatever hotel the visiting team stayed at. And after the game was over and they left, maybe the game was on a Saturday or Sunday. On Monday, Tommy Peterson, who was, you know, very good right shot D on that team, he came in my office and he handed me a group of a packet of about 20 pieces of paper. He goes, "Hey, I thought you might find this interesting." And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Well, look through it." And I started looking through it, and it's Detroit's game plan for us in the playoffs, because it was kind of getting to where it was obvious we were going to play them. And so I said to him, like, "How did you get this?" And he said, "Well, my girlfriend works the front desk at the hotel where they were staying. And the assistant coaches came down to her and said, 'Can you make me a copy of this?' And she went in the back room to the copy machine and looked at it. And being a hockey player's girlfriend and being a smart gal, she made 2 copies. She gave one back to the assistant coach, gave one to her boyfriend.
She gave one to the Red Wings assistant coach.
So Red Wings assistant coach had brought it down there. So we had their plan against us. You know, you get most of that stuff off video. I can't say it was the game breaker or series breaking deal that we had their plan, but that's the funny story. The kind of sports interesting story is you know, Bob Erie was our captain. And so as we approached the first playoffs there, you know, it was my first time coaching a Stanley Cup playoff. And Bob Erie had played with the Penguins during their cup years, Mario Lemieux, Ron Francis, et cetera, et cetera. So he had won a couple cups, not as a captain, but as a role player on the Penguins. But now he was our captain. So I went to him and I said, "Listen, a lot of the guys have never played a Stanley Cup playoff game. I've never coached one. You know, why don't you just talk to the team? You know, first day of practice before our, you know, maybe we had 4 days to get ready for our first game or something. Why don't you talk to the team? Just tell me your experiences. You know, tell them what you think, you know, we should be ready for, prepare for." And so, you know, he kind of looked at me kind of weird. I didn't know if he liked the idea or thought I was, just a stupid coach. You know, sometimes you don't know what the players are thinking when you're asking them stuff, talking to them. But so he's like, you know, he didn't give me a real enthusiastic yes, but he seemed like he was going to do it.
Sure.
So the Monday came, first day of playoff prep, and so I said, hey, Bob, why don't you talk about your experiences? And he stood up and he goes, "Guys, I'd like to tell you 16 things that it takes to win a Stanley Cup." And I went, "Oh my God, 16! I just wanted, you know, I'd only asked for like maybe a sentence." And he prepared a book, And then he said the reason it's 16 is it takes 16 wins to win a Stanley Cup. So I thought of the 16 most important things that were part of the Stanley Cups that I was on a team with, the Penguins. And, you know, I've used those 16 things for every single playoff preparation,
Really?
for every team I've coached, junior, pro, minor pro, Europe, Korea, Asia, Europe. When we have a playoffs that's starting, you know, we start with Bob Erie's 16 rules for winning a championship. So that was helpful too in terms of, I think, our success in the playoffs.
What were a couple of those rules? Anything surprising or, you know?
No, but I don't think so. And I'm driving a 26-foot U-Haul truck as we're talking right now, right across the country. So
Hard to remember.
So I've got to run my blinker and weave in and out like Larry off. I feel like Larry off making moves here in the traffic. But anyhow, will is greater than skill. That was one of them. The idea of how hard you want it, how much you want it's way more important than how hard you shoot it or how fast you skate. So will is greater than skill was one of the 16. No peripheral opponents. And that was really just, you got to get organized. You know, playoffs come and there's family and people want tickets and that can really chew up your energy and your focus. So, he talked about, and one of the 16 was no peripheral opponents. And that's all that stuff. Like, of course you're going to want to take care of your wife, your family, your friends that are coming to town, your parents, your grandparents, they're coming to see you on the road. It's a playoff. So we're not going to not help those people, but you gotta be extra organized in doing so, so that it never gets in the way of the game plan and the focus and the review of the previous game and the preparation for the next game and the pre-scout of your opponent. You got to make sure you're highly organized when you start these playoffs. You're never out of a game. Talked about, the other team might take a 5-minute penalty that you didn't expect, and you might score 2 goals to get. So you're never out. There was so many gems in those 16, and I'm sorry that that they don't fly right off the top of my head.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, you're not coaching us, so it's okay.
No, you got to drive the U-Haul as well.
Yeah.
Moving forward to the 1995 playoffs, one of your boldest decisions was when you were down 3-2 in the first round against the Calgary Flames. You started goaltender Wade Flaherty, if I'm saying that right, over Arturs Irbe, fan favorite Arturs Irbe. Wade helped you upset Calgary in that round. What was behind the decision for that?
There's two sides of the goaltending in that series, by the way. Calgary flipped back and forth with their goaltenders. And so did Detroit, if you remember a little bit, between Osgood and Asenza. Detroit was flipping back and forth between their goaltenders, and Calgary did. And I think the history in the NHL, that's never worked. If you look at the Minnesota Wild this year, tried it with Gustafsson and help me out, guys.
Fleury.
Fleury,
yeah, back and forth, and so
like if you have 2 goaltenders, you have no goaltenders, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's really proven true, and even up to this year with the Wild, right? But those things are difficult because our thing the year before, Irbe, he was probably clearly our MVP. I mean, Larionov and Makarov and Norton and those guys and Bob Erie, they did a lot of good things for our team, but Irbe was unbelievable. I don't remember the exact reason why Flaherty, Irbe did have a pretty serious hand injury that
Sure,
affected
his
his
dog bit him.
career. Yeah, and I don't remember. Obviously, we're talking about something that was 30 years ago, so I
Yeah.
don't remember the timing. But it might have been the dog bite situation had hampered his performance during the year
Mhm.
in such a way that we had just made a decision to go with Flaherty in the playoffs. But boy, talk about excitement and having to go back there and in a game 7 and a double overtime and Whitney's little tip of the puck.
Right.
Yeah, pretty special stuff.
And in the next season, 1995-96, the Sharks got off to a slow start and you got let go. Just sort of what happened with that team? What was different about that team?
I don't know. I don't know. I just know that it wasn't working the way it had.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first experience as a coach being fired. It was sad. It was traumatic. It was, for myself, I'm now where I can almost, I've been fired 3 times in the business now, coaching 40 years. And I've gotten where just as you get older and you understand the business and winning and losing and when GMs are under pressure and the way the GM talks to you and his body language to you, I could think, I would say that when I first got fired, it's very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
It personally affected me for months. And I can tell you now that I think I could tell you by the body language and the communication with the GMs I work for, I bet if I get in a situation where I'm going to be fired, I can tell you the day it's going to happen. And I can tell you that it probably wouldn't bother me more than about 30 seconds now. And that's just what happens over the course of 40 years as you start to understand the nature of the business, the nature of the game, the nature of coaching, the nature of how coaches are dealt with by management. You just get where it doesn't bother you as much. It's just part of the game. At first you take it like the way you take it is you're not any good. You're not a good coach. You screwed up. And then eventually, as you've got through it a couple times, you realize, well, there's things about me as a coach I definitely got to keep working on. But a lot of times in this business, changes are made that have nothing to do with you. It just is what needed to be done. And they chose you as the change that they were going to institute. So you approach it very differently as you gain experience in the business. So,
and you mentioned,
Yeah, no, it's, we're talking about, don't forget, we're talking about me as a coach. We're talking about, I think I was 35 years old, right?
Sure,
I think
yeah.
Larry Onoff was like 32 or 31. It's just if I could, no one gets a second chance really in life. You don't get to start over. But if I could go back and start over, I wouldn't even want to be in the NHL at that point. Because I think if I knew then or at some point know what I know now, having done it 40 years, having experience, having the ability to deal with players on a level that I wasn't good enough to do when I was 35 years old. I wish I would actually become a coach more when I was 45 or 50, not when I was 33. Anyhow, go on. I'm talking about myself. We got to talk.
No, yeah. Well, no, that's what I want to ask about. Like, did you have trouble maybe, I don't know, relating to players, but you were close in age with them. So what was sort of the issue being such a young head coach in the NHL and, maybe you weren't able to communicate with players the way that you could now?
Oh, 100%. You're 100% accurate. So if I were to simplify this, I would say that when I let's just divide the 40 years I've coached into first half, second half for simplification. First half, what I was is I was a fairly cutting edge, brilliant. I should say that. That sounds, I don't like talking about myself, but I think I was ahead of the game in terms of strategies that teams could employ that would produce winning.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could teach work and discipline and team strategies really, really good. And so my coaching was me in my coach's office, step out into the locker room, tell the team how they should play, step back into my coach's office, go behind the bench when they played. If they didn't do it the way I wanted, yell at them for not doing it the way I wanted them to. Go back to my coach's office. And so there was very little personal interaction in that process.
Mm-hmm.
And so now if you go to the second half, I would say that, what I've learned is that there's 25 players, 25 different personalities. All of those players have an individual motivation within that team plan. And all of those players want to be seen, felt, heard, appreciated, supported, and they want a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my ability to build relationships with people and players is, out of necessity, is 100 times better than it was when I was a 35-year-old San Jose Sharks coach.
Sure.
I just wasn't smart enough to appreciate or understand how important building relationships was. So now I don't, before I only coached in front of the team. I still coach in front of the team, but, now I also talk to each player as much as I can. So I coach in the hallway. I coach, privately in my office. I don't just coach in a group setting. I try to do it differently now. So.
Well, that speaks to sort of the change or adjustment in coaching over the last 3 or 4 decades too. If you want to compare, like, Mike Keenan, 40 years ago to John Cooper, more, cerebral, maybe more of a you have to spend more time with your players and have that one-on-one relationship and communication. But I did want to ask you about one relationship with the San Jose Sharks with a very noteworthy player there that didn't quite work out with Pat Falloon. Pat Falloon, of course, was the Sharks' very first round pick, the number 2 pick of the 91 draft after Eric Lindros. And a lot obviously was expected of Pat being drafted that high by a new team, and things didn't quite work out for Pat over his career like would have been expected in 1991. And Pat was traded at kind of around the same time that you were let go by the Sharks. And just what didn't work with Pat in the NHL?
Well, yeah, good question, because that same year Whitney was drafted, but more like in the 4th or 6th round.
Yeah, 2nd round actually.
Yeah, okay, you're right. So both were kind of similar players, right? Not big. I think Pat Falloon would have been more of a pure goal scorer than Whitney. I think Whitney had a little bit more of a playmaking ability than Pat. Both same size, both Canadian junior players, Western Hockey League guys, similar background, similar age. One had a long career and one didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so why does that happen? I don't know for sure what makes one situation work and one not. I think, Ray just found a way to survive the business, to make adjustments, to find his niche, to see what needed to get done. And maybe Pat didn't make the adjustments that needed to be done. I think sometimes if you went to the players now, I think you'd find some similar answers to what I just said about myself as a coach. Like, I think if guys could go back and go, man, if I'd have just applied what I learned, or if I had another chance, man, I would do some of the things I learned. I figured it out too late. I didn't figure it out in time. And so that happens to both coaches and players. And I don't know the specifics. I know Pat went on to the Flyers and didn't last a real long time there either. But I would also flip it to the Ray Whitney story, which to me is a tremendous hockey story.
Sure,
because,
absolutely.
Ray is not that big. He's pretty small, and he wasn't that fast. And so if you ever, talked about, well, if you're small and slow, you're never going to make it in this business. But he did, and he survived a long, long time. And so hats off to the job he did to make a pretty good career out of the challenges he faced with his limited size and speed, and he yet ultra successful.
And speaking of Ray, since you bring him up, he left the Sharks though a year after you left the Sharks. But do you have any sense of why the organization maybe didn't write it out with Ray Whitney? Because obviously after he left the Sharks, I mean, he was in the NHL for 15 more years after that. And obviously, if you look back, that's a mistake in franchise history, letting Ray Whitney go. You drafted him and you let him walk. So just what was the organizational perspective of Ray in those, before you got let go?
Yeah, I can't give you an answer to that. It's taken me 40 years of trial and error and a lot of mistakes and a lot of studying and a lot of watching other coaches and talking to other coaches and trying to be a lifetime learner, which I really try to do. And I don't think I would have survived in this ever-changing psychology that, our young men come up through sports with now, in this somewhat entitled age or different age or, social media, whatever you want to say. The players are different now than they were 40 years ago. So you're trying to adapt. I think it's why Scotty Bowman lasted forever, because he was had the ability to adapt to generation after generation. And so my answer to your question is I've spent so much focus on coaching and know how hard it is to figure out how to do things right in coaching that I never really was part of a lot of those discussions of who we drafting, who we trading, who should we keep? It really was the general manager's office, along with his support staff, making those decisions. And I would be, knowing how hard it has been to learn how to coach, I'd really be on a line if I tried to second guess, management's decision, because I'm sure those decisions are just as hard to learn how to do right as would coaching decisions be. And it would take, I think, a long time to learn how to get those right. And so, the only thing I would say maybe is, I was a young, inexperienced coach that had some success and also failed and got fired by the Sharks. And no, I'm a way better coach now than I was 20 years ago, and I've learned from a lot of things I didn't do right. But the Sharks staff was young too, right?
Sure.
And so, Dean, who became the general manager while I was still there, I mean, young general manager, maybe those were mistakes of a young general manager. I don't know. He went on and when he gained experience, helped the Los Angeles, Kings win Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
So he figured it out. Obviously he knows what he's doing, but maybe those were youthful management mistakes. And I don't know. I don't have the answer for you because I wasn't privy to any of those conversations.
Okay, fair enough. Moving forward in your career, the last NHL job you held actually was coaching the New Jersey Devils in 2002. For the last 21 years, you continued to coach, but outside the NHL. Have you ever, thought about going back to the NHL, or is it sort of like you like coaching outside of it?
Yeah, I tried for a while. I just think that thing went cold.
Mm-hmm.
It'd make a good television cold case file. yeah, it just went cold. I kind of lost connections with the people that I knew.
Mhm.
And so I at some point, I think anybody would want to be an NHL player or coach. It's the highest level of hockey in the world. So I can't say that I wouldn't want to be there or wouldn't enjoy going back there or don't even now think about that as a possibility. But when it hasn't happened for 20 years, you're not holding your breath.
Sure.
And so in the meantime, what I can tell you is I absolutely love coaching. I'm so lucky. Even though I'm not in the NHL the last 21 years, I consider myself one of the luckiest people walking the face of the earth because I get to do what I love. And in addition to that, I've been able to see cultures in South Korea, Poland, Hungary, Switzerland, France. I've gotten to see the world. So how many people, it's like when I kind of ran out of North American jobs and I looked at a job in France and I called, colleagues and friends and all the hockey people said, don't do it. It's not that good a league. You're going to disappear from the North American scene. You're never going to get back here and coach. Just not a good enough league. You're not going to get paid very much money. Don't do it. So it was 5-0. Don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I called 5 non-hockey people, and I asked them, "What do you think of something like that?"
Yeah.
And all 5 of them said, well, "So you can coach hockey, right?" I go, "Yeah." "And you can live in France?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh my God, nobody gets chances like that." Now, I thought about it. It's the same thing. I got asked to coach the Hungary's national team, which I did this year in the World Championships in Finland, right? When I was first asked, I wanted to just be thorough, thinking about whether I should do it or not. And so I always like to ask other people's opinion. Ultimately, you got to make your own decisions in life, but nothing wrong with seeking counsel. So I asked people, and the basic thing back that people said was, how many people get to coach a team in the World Championships in their lifetime? Forget who the team is. How many people get to coach in the World Championships in their lifetime?
Right.
And the answer is like nobody, like hardly any, like 0.5% of all the hockey coaches in the world ever get that opportunity. I knew Hungary; they were the lowest seed going in the tournament. I knew our chances were slim. But when I thought about it, I thought, man, that would really be disrespectful to take an opportunity that 1 million people would die to have and just say, no, it's not maybe the team that's going to win it all, so I don't want to do it. So I just see all of my life as a guy from a small little 5,000 town in northern Minnesota where you fish and hunt and try to stay warm in the winter, and you get to do all these things. And how could you ever not think that you're fortunate in all those opportunities? So I feel lucky.
Right. And like you mentioned, you've coached in France, Switzerland, Poland, Hungary, and Asia. The one that stands out to me is the 3 years you spent coaching in Korea, in the Asia League, and that's just not a place where you think of a lot of ice hockey going on. And in that league, you had to travel from Korea to Japan to play games. But can you just talk about that experience? And you had a couple of NHLers on your team, former NHLers, and Alexander Frolov and Matt Merkley. So just talk about that experience in general.
Yeah, I went to South Korea to coach. Hockey is a small world. It's unbelievable. The trainer of the medical staff of the New Jersey Devils, his father was in the military in South Korea. Mother is Korean, so he's half Korean. And he, at the end of his career, after finishing with the Devils, went over there and was the trainer of a hockey team over there. And that's the connection in me being hired to coach the team. So, but it was coming right off the Olympics, which were hosted by Korea, 2000 and I'm going to forget, maybe 2018. 2018. Yeah, thank you. So they had just, hosted the Olympics. They had trained for 2 or 3 years. They had brought in a number of Canadian players and granted them citizenship. to give their team a fighting chance in the Olympics. And so, so hockey was on a bit of an upswing in interest. Hockey in Japan has a history for 100 years.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Hockey, and hockey in Korea is about a 30-year-old process. And the two of them joined to form the Asia League, the two countries. And it was it was a really, really, really fun experience. For example, there's two things about Korean culture. One is age is like, it's just a culture where you honor older people, right?
Sure.
And I'm getting old. And so, being the oldest person in the organization, it was kind of mandatory, whether you like me or not, you had to show me respect, right? So how could I not like that feature of their culture? The other thing is that, in Korean culture, when you say thank you, you bow and say thank you at the same time to whoever you're thanking. And 100% of the practices, when the practice ended and the guys had, done a few little extra fun things that they like to do after, and you're just hanging out by the sideboards where the players exit the ice surface to walk back to their locker room, 100% of the practices for 3 straight years, every player, 100%, bowed and thanked me for the practice. And if I can just tell you, a North American practice that, when you're finished the practice, especially maybe if the team didn't play well the night before, or the guys, weren't really as good in practice as you wanted them to be, and you had raised the level of your coaching intensity to try to draw that out of them, there was a lot of players, leaving the ice saying a lot of things besides thank you as they walked by in a North American practice. So it was just like, even if I had been very intense during the practice, it was just so fun to have a player always 100% say thank you when it was all done.
I can't imagine Jaromir Jagr bowing to you and thanking you after Penguins practice.
No. But can you believe the guy still plays at 52?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah, still great, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I could tell you another guy, between Link Gates and Jaromir Jagr stories, you could have a 10-week podcast, and I could keep it full of material in terms of stories. Me with Jagr, there's hundreds of stories there, but the one thing I will tell you, and some of the stories were tough because he wasn't a great team guy, but he was a phenomenal, probably the most phenomenal athlete I ever coached of all the hockey players I coached. The things he could do on an individual basis were so spectacular. He was so gifted, so talented. And he's still doing it at age 51. He's just a freak, a positive freak, but a freak in terms of how great an athlete he is.
Did that experience in San Jose of letting the Larionov line kind of go do their own thing? Did you carry that over with Jagr and sort of let Jaromir be himself?
Yeah, for sure it helped. But Jaromir was extreme. Like when I got hired there, they asked me all summer, "Are you going to make Jagr wear a helmet for practice?" And I said, "Of course, we're gonna practice really close to how we play. We want to practice hard. The games are easy, so everybody wears full equipment." But they asked me like 10 times before so then you're like, why are they asking me this many times? So the first day of practice with the Penguins, and by the way, in those days, probably still true, but you had whatever team rules you had and the fines that would accompany breaking a team rule, you had to get the players to sign off on those. They had a union rep, and the union had to kind of okay those rules. You couldn't just make up your own rules with some ridiculous fine.
Sure.
The union had a right to look at your rules. So I told the the Penguin team before that first practice, listen, here's our rules. I handed them out. Wearing full equipment was part of it. And I said, let's make sure you guys get this checked off on, but these are our team rules. I gave them out right away. I said, make sure your union rep, gets these okayed. Anyhow, so we go out now for the first practice, right? So I'm going out. I'm kind of nervous. It's my second time in the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been with San Jose, but it at the end, I got fired. It didn't work at the end. So now you get a second chance. You want to do it right. You think you've learned a few things from your first experience, maybe correct a couple mistakes you had made. And so here you go. It's your first day again. So I'm out there skating around, 5 minutes before the actual practice is going to start. All the players are out there. Everybody's kind of doing laps like you see at every hockey practice you ever go to. And Yarmer, who notoriously came out with like 2 seconds before the buzzer to start practice, wasn't out there yet. And all I could think of is, is he going to have his helmet on or not? and out he comes, no helmet. Comes out, starts skating around. So now I got to make a decision, do I kick him off and make him put his helmet on? I just told everybody we got to wear full gear. I handed out the team rules. Or, you're thinking, and you got a kind of a guy on each shoulder talking in your ear, angel and devil talking to you.
Sure.
And one guy's going, you were kind of a hard ass in San Jose. It might be why you got fired. Just mellow out a little bit. Don't worry about it today. Handle it off the ice. Do it quietly. Do it privately. Don't make a big scene. And you got the other guy in the other ear going, hey, it's your team. You got to establish your rules day one. You can back off later, but this is your time to set your culture, set your, you got to do it right from the very get-go if you're going to have a good culture. And so it literally took me like 4 or 5 laps to kind of get the answer in my head. And I'm sure all the other players were just looking like what's going to happen. First confrontation between Jágr and the new coach. So I'm sure it was pure entertainment for everybody else on the ice. So finally I decided I'm going to go. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make him put his helmet on. So now I decided I'm going to go talk to him, right? So I started skating towards him. But like a good player, you can see the whole ice with a good shoulder check. He saw me coming. So he just picked up the pace. So I swear to God, it took me and I'm an ex-goalie. I can't even skate. And he's the best player in the history of the game, almost. And I couldn't catch him. He just kept picking up speed. So I'm chasing him around the rink, laps, like 4 or 5 laps. Finally, I had to cut diagonally and cut him off. Other players were just howling, laughing. Anyhow, so I did. I said, "Hey, I already told you got to wear all your gear." And he said, "Coach," and I said, "Yeah, what?" He goes, "I don't got to follow your rules." He goes, the union hasn't approved your rules. I don't got to follow any of your rules yet. So that was his opening comment to me. I go, well, yeah, all right, you're right. You don't have to. I said, but in 2 days when they pass the rules, you're gonna have to wear it. And he's like, I'll go put it on. So he did go back in the locker room and put it on. So, yeah.
Could fill up.
I'll tell you one more Jágr story.
Oh, please, yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think it's my second year there. Jágr had signed I think a 6-year contract. So he's into 2 years of it, and he didn't like it. So he wanted to redo it. So all year long he's in this contract renegotiation. And it's in the papers every day, and it's a bit of a distraction. But I have nothing to do with any of that stuff, so I don't even kind of pay attention. My dad would say, "You shake your hand, that's your deal. Sign your name on a paper, that's the deal." So I didn't even understand it. Kind of from my upbringing, it didn't. It's renegotiation, but it's sports, right? So whatever. So one day we're in New Jersey, and Rick Keough is one of my assistants. He's running the power play, and he's having a pregame power play meeting. And I'm in the back, standing against the wall. And Jágr comes in at like the last second, and he stands against the wall with me. He rarely would go like sit with the other players because, you know, it just wasn't cool to be the same as the other guys. He always had to be different in his own unique, weird way, whatever. It's Yarmer. So he stands at the back against the wall, and the meeting starts, and he kind of whispers to me, "Coach." And I'm like, "Yeah, Yarmer." He goes, "We have too many meetings." And I just instantly looked up at him. Don't know how I thought of it so quick, but just instantly I said, "Yarmer." He goes, "Yeah, Coach." I go, "You're in contract renegotiations, right?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Just put it in there. You don't got to come to any of our meetings." And I was kind of joking, but I was just messing with him, right? And he got this gigantic smile on his face, and he had a huge smile, and he got the biggest smile I've ever seen. And he looked right at me. Now he's not even paying any attention to the power play meeting that's going on in the, you know, at the front of the room. And he looked me right in the eyes from about 6 inches away. He goes, "Coach, that's your best idea ever." He said, I'll take $1 million less a year if I don't have to be in your meetings."
This is a good strategy. You're going to get in with management, though.
Yeah. So I said, "All right, there you go, Yarmer. Fair enough. Pay attention now. We got a meeting going on."
Did he put that into his next contract?
Yeah. And then he said, oh, and by the way, Coach, my dad gets to be your assistant coach." And I don't know where that came from, but I didn't even, you know, by then I wanted to pay attention to the meeting myself, so I was ignoring it by then. So anyway, I don't know where that came from.
Okay, but still, I want, like, his next contract, was there any kind of clause in terms of he didn't have to attend as many meetings, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that would have been unprecedented, probably.
No, I think when he went home, I'm sure he told himself, "That was dumb. I ain't giving up $1 million." So.
That's the million. I guess back, kind of wrapping up, we've gone through a lot of your coaching experience and everything. Back to the present day, you're going to be becoming the head coach of the Wenatchee Wild. Can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to take that job, and a little bit about the change that the organization is going through right now?
Yeah, I mean, the job, the reason for the job was primarily my family. I've coached in South Korea, Poland, and Hungary for the last 6 years, and my wife has stayed behind to raise our son, who's now 18 years old and graduated high school. So she stayed back to give his life some stability. And I just felt the priority needed to be my wife, really, my family. So having a job back in the U.S. puts us together. She's in a car right behind me right now, I'm sure, screaming and chewing my ass out without me being in the car every time I, change lanes and pass someone. I'm a fast driver and she's a slow driver. So, but yeah, here we go. The reason is the girl in the car behind me is why I decided to coach back in North America. There was some security. It was a 4-year contract, and I enjoyed coaching in that league. Mm-hmm. I've heard great things about the people in charge of the program, Bliss Littler. And so, yeah, I like that age group. I find that 17 to 21 year old people, they make you young all over again. And so I find that group fun to work with. So those were some of the reasons behind it.
Have you been able to meet with any of the players yet, or is this kind of you're moving there now kind of thing?
I've talked to the three. They have 3 first-round draft picks on the team, and I've talked to all 3 of those guys.
Gotcha.
And then just the move itself and finding a rental home and packing stuff and going across the country, and I got busy. So all the other conversations are going to have to be in person when the players arrive at camp. I mean, the team is the old Winnipeg Ice franchise that moved from Cranbrook to Winnipeg, tried to survive in Winnipeg for a few years, couldn't make it go financially. and got sold to the ownership group in Wenatchee and is now back there. They had a really old team last year. They kind of made a lot of trades and brought in a lot of older players to make a run for the Memorial Cup. They were close. They lost to Seattle, or they'd have gone to the Memorial Cup. They've got remnants of that team left. As I mentioned, they have 3 first-round draft picks, so there is some talent on that team. A couple other kids have been drafted, and I think 9 of the players are going to go to NHL camps, some rookie camps, some regular camps. So there'll be, I think, a chance for the team to be decent this year. After that, because of all the draft picks that were given up to try to, make last year's team a championship team, there could be a bit of a rebuild going on a couple years after that. But, I went to Everett when I first went to the WHL back in 2003. I went there, and they were a expansion team at the time. And I showed up with the San Jose Sharks in year 3. And so it's kind of right up my alley in a way. I don't mind those challenges. I actually enjoy kind of being around teams that people have low expectations for. And kind of, I really enjoy having a team, kind of a light bulb go off with a team that didn't believe in itself. And then the light bulb goes off, and the team, you can see collective, they're like, I think we're pretty good. Like, we got a chance here. I like that. I like that process of watching that happen. So those are some of my thoughts headed into my new job.
Yeah, you've got actually a San Jose draft pick as well there, and Mason Bopit, the goaltender.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Some of the older players kind of depends on what the NHL teams do with the guys.
Sure.
If the player's an overage player and they want to put him in the AHL, then they can. But if the player's not of a certain age, they can't put them in the AHL. They got to send them back to their respective junior teams. So we're going to really be dependent on the decisions of NHL teams first, in terms of what our team will look like. And so there'll be a month of patience as guys kind of come to our camp, get themselves a little bit ready for the NHL camp, disappear to the NHL camp, and then it's a waiting game seeing which of those players will be sent back to us.
Yeah, we've got one of my favorites from the last draft, Zach Benson. I think is going to be playing for you. He's one of my, just as a person who watches prospects a lot, just one of my favorites. I think he's going to be great for you.
There, like I said, there is some talent. Connor Geeky and Zach Benson and Matt Savoy all were first round picks, and so I'm excited to kind of see what those guys have to offer. Really excited to kind of. I like being part of starting new, and so this whole idea of watching this group of guys kind of establish the culture for the future of Wenatchee. I'm excited to kind of see how that develops.
Yeah, kind of full circle from your early days in the Shark system, and starting off in a new franchise, newish franchise.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I had. Sheng, did you have anything else? I know we've
No.
been talking for about an hour.
Yeah, we've been talking for a while. So yeah. So thank you so much for your time, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you guys for breaking up this. I have already seen the one tree you see in North Dakota, so that's it for trees in North Dakota. So thanks for breaking up my trip a little bit here.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't too dangerous with the U-Haul and and having to talk and everything.
Yeah, no, I think North Dakota, Montana, it's the perfect spot, right? You don't see a whole lot of. If we'd have done it yesterday in downtown Chicago, I'd have been in trouble. So
you timed that really well. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Thank you
Kevin,
so much for your
have
time,
a safe
Kevin.
drive. Yeah. Rest of the way,
Okay.
and good luck in Wenatchee. And let's catch up in season so you can tell us more about Mason or whoever else is, whatever's going on with the Wild.
Yep. Sounds good. Thanks for the chat, guys.